Admiral Zvix's crystalline antennae twitched with barely contained irritation as they studied their diplomatic assignment tablet for the 5th time since arriving at Genesis Mall. The gleaming commercial center represented everything that confused them about humanity: chaotic, loud, and filled with seemingly purposeless activity. Their species, the Vaserics, had long since evolved beyond such inefficient gatherings for commerce and recreation. Cultural integration study of human military preparation methods, Zvix muttered, their translator rendering the words in crisp English. What a waste of my expertise. As one of the Galactic Confederation's most decorated tactical minds, they felt this assignment was beneath their station. The humans, after all, had barely established their first Mars colony. The Admiral's four-fingered hand unconsciously adjusted their formal diplomatic sash, a habit that emerged whenever they felt uncomfortable. The sash, adorned with intricate patterns denoting their numerous battle victories, seemed out of place among the casual attire of the mall's weekend crowd. A group of human younglings darted past, their high-pitched laughter causing Zvix's sensory membranes to ripple in discomfort. The Admiral had specifically chosen this early hour, hoping to avoid crowds, but it seemed humans had no concept of orderly scheduling for recreational activities. The pulsing sounds of electronic entertainment drew their attention to a section of the mall designated as Stellar Arcade. Zvix's initial instinct was to avoid the noise, but their mission parameters specifically mentioned observing human military training methods, including simulations. Perhaps there would be something of minimal value to report. The arcade's entrance featured a holographic display of various spacecraft designs, most of which made the Admiral's tactical training cringe. As they stepped inside, their eyes adjusted to the dimmer lighting, and their antennae began filtering the cacophony of game sounds into manageable data streams. That's when they noticed her. A human child, female, approximately 12 Earth years old based on their briefing materials, stood before a large curved display. Her small hands danced across the control interface with practiced precision. What caught Zvix's attention wasn't her size or age, but rather the scenario playing out on the screen before her. The game, labeled Stellar Commander 3000 in glowing text, displayed a complex three-dimensional battlefield. The child's forces, marked in blue, were executing a perfectly timed resonance maneuver around a Class 3 neutron star. Zvix found themselves stepping closer, their antennae extended in sudden interest. "Sarah, you've got company," called out an older human behind the counter, causing the child to glance briefly over her shoulder. "Hi," she said cheerfully, never taking her hands off the controls. "You can watch if you want. I'm about to break my high score on the Centaur Challenge." Zvix's translator took a moment to process the casual invitation, but their attention was already fixed on the screen. The child's fleet was simultaneously managing radiation shielding, gravitational stress, and defensive formations while preparing for what appeared to be. The Admiral's eyes widened. She was setting up a slingshot attack vector that bore a striking resemblance to the infamous Vaseric's victory at Denobola Prime. But that was impossible. The tactics used in that battle were still classified at the highest levels of the Confederation. Yes, Sarah pumped her fist as her ships emerged from the stellar gravity well at precisely the right moment, catching the AI opponents in a perfect crossfire. That's how you do it. Zvix found themselves reaching for their data tablet with trembling fingers. This required further study. Much further study. Perhaps this assignment wouldn't be the waste of time they had initially assumed. "Hey," Sarah turned to them with a bright smile. "Do you want to try? The first game is on me. It's really fun once you get the hang of the basics." The basics. Zvix's antennae twitched again, this time with something approaching concern. What exactly did humans consider advanced if this was basic? 3 hours had passed since Admiral Zvix's first encounter with Sarah Chen, and their diplomatic tablet now held more notes than they'd taken during the last Confederation Tactical Summit. The arcade's artificial lighting had shifted to accommodate Earth's afternoon cycle, but the Admiral barely noticed, their attention fixed on Sarah's latest gaming session. "The trick," Sarah explained between sips of something called a blue raspberry slushy, is to think about space like it's made of water. Everything flows, you know. Her fingers danced across the controls as she demonstrated, shifting her fleet into a spiral formation that perfectly utilized the gravitational eddies of a nearby gas giant. Zvix's antennae quivered. The child was casually explaining principles that had earned their tactical advisor, Supreme Commander Vexfor, the highest military honors in the Confederation. And she had learned this from playing games. Where did you learn these strategies? The Admiral asked, trying to keep their voice steady. Sarah shrugged, her attention still on the screen. Oh, mostly from watching Stream Space. There's this really cool player, Starlord_42, who does tutorials on advanced fleet mechanics. Plus, my friend Jenny and I practice together online most weekends. The mention of widespread knowledge sharing made Zvix's outer membrane pale slightly. They watched as Sarah initiated what appeared to be a standard pursuit formation, only to suddenly split her fleet into 3 autonomous units. Each group executed perfectly timed micro-jumps, creating a tactical envelope that would have made the Confederation's best strategists jealous. Boom! Triple weave containment. Sarah grinned, bouncing slightly on her toes as the enemy AI fleet found itself trapped. Jenny showed me that one. It's super effective against the level 8 bosses because they always expect you to attack from a single vector. Zvix's translator struggled with the casual terminology, but the principles being demonstrated were undeniable. Their third heart began beating faster as they realized the implications. This wasn't just one gifted child. This was systematic knowledge distribution of advanced space combat techniques through entertainment networks. A small crowd had gathered to watch Sarah play, mostly other young humans who offered suggestions and cheered at particularly impressive maneuvers. Zvix noticed 2 boys, no more than 10 Earth years old, discussing alternative strategies that sounded disturbingly similar to classified Confederation battle plans. You should try the ripple effect here, one suggested, pointing at Sarah's screen. If you sync the shield harmonics with your weapon cycles, you can create this cool cascade failure in their defense grid. Zvix nearly dropped their tablet. Shield harmonics synchronization was a theoretical concept their own scientists were still struggling to perfect. Yet these children were treating it as a basic gameplay mechanic. Oh yeah, Sarah nodded, immediately implementing the suggestion. Like in the Mars defense scenario. Watch this, Admiral Zvix. Admiral watched, their professional composure cracking slightly, as Sarah proceeded to execute a perfect shield weaponry synchronization that collapsed the AI's defenses in seconds. The crowd of children cheered while Zvix fought to keep their exoskeleton from changing colors in shock. Sarah, they managed to ask, how many humans play this game? Oh, loads. She beamed, starting another round. It's super popular. We got over 50 million active players worldwide. There's even a professional league now, but I'm still too young to qualify. Have to be at least 15 for that. 50 million. 50 million humans practicing advanced space combat techniques as entertainment. Zvix's antennae went completely still, a sign of severe stress in their species. Hey, are you okay? Sarah asked, finally noticing the Admiral's distress. You look a bit sparkly. The game's not that complicated once you get into it. Here, why don't you try a practice round? We can start with something simple, like quantum torpedo timing or hyperlane intersection plotting. Simple. Zvix stared at the child, their worldview quietly shattering. They needed to contact Central Command immediately. But first, perhaps they should accept that practice round. After all, understanding the enemy. No, understanding their potential allies was crucial. Yes, they said carefully, their translator struggling to maintain a neutral tone. Please show me these basics. Admiral Zvix had requisitioned their most advanced tactical analysis software from the Confederation Embassy, claiming it was necessary for thorough cultural research. Now, as they sat in the arcade for the third consecutive day, the holographic overlay from their ocular implants transformed the game screen into a detailed military analysis grid. Sarah was explaining something about spawn camping to a younger player, but Zvix's attention was fixed on their data readouts. The child's casual fleet movements were triggering warning after warning in their tactical systems. See, if you position your support ships here, Sarah pointed to a seemingly random spot near an asteroid cluster, you can catch anyone trying to slip through the blind spot in your sensor range. Zvix's tactical display lit up like a supernova. The position Sarah had chosen was a perfect null detection zone, a concept that the Confederation had only theorized existed. Their antennae twisted into such a complex knot of anxiety that a passing human child asked if they were trying to make balloon animals. Sarah, Zvix ventured carefully. How did you determine that was an optimal position? She shrugged, her fingers never stopping their dance across the controls. It just makes sense, right? Like hiding behind a tree in hide and seek, but in 3D+, the asteroid field creates this cool effect where your ship's energy signatures kind of blend in with the background radiation. The Admiral's exoskeleton began to shimmer with stress patterns. She was describing advanced stealth principles that had taken their best scientists decades to understand, and comparing it to a children's recreational activity. Oh, hey, Mom. Sarah waved as Mrs. Chen approached with a paper bag. Did you bring the snacks? Of course, sweetheart. Admiral Zvix, would you like some potato chips? I brought extra. Zvix politely declined, their attention drawn to a new alert from their tactical systems. Sarah had begun implementing what appeared to be a standard resource-gathering operation, but their software was detecting something far more sophisticated underneath. Watch this, Sarah grinned, her fleet spreading out in a seemingly random pattern. I learned this trick from watching old space movies. If you spread your ships out just right, when the enemy triggers your trap. Zvix's third heart nearly stopped. The pattern. It wasn't random at all. It was a perfect replica of the legendary maze of Xerxes, a battle formation so complex that it had only been successfully deployed twice in Confederation history. And this human child had recreated it because it looked cool in an entertainment video. Here comes the best part, Sarah continued, completely oblivious to the Admiral's existential crisis. Her ships suddenly converge, creating a cascading series of gravitational distortions that trap the AI fleet in a web of spatial distortions. We call it the space net. Pretty neat, huh? Mrs. Chen smiled proudly. That's my girl. All those physics documentaries you watch are really paying off in your game skills. Zvix's translator nearly shorted out. Physics documentaries. They had assumed humanity's entertainment was their primary source of tactical knowledge, but if they were also studying the underlying scientific principles. Oh yeah. Sarah nodded, starting another round. Did you know that real spaceships actually use similar principles? I read this article about how the new Mars shuttles calculate gravity assists. It's basically the same thing we do in the game, just slower. The Admiral's datapad clattered to the floor. Their species had assumed humanity's recent expansion into their solar system was a primitive first step. But what if it wasn't the beginning of their spacefaring capabilities, but rather the careful, methodical implementation of principles they had already mastered in simulation? Sarah, Zvix managed to ask, their voice modulator struggling to maintain composure, would you say this game is challenging for most humans your age? Nah, it's pretty standard stuff, she replied, casually executing another maneuver that violated 3 known laws of physics. The real challenge is in the competitive rankings. Some of those players come up with strategies that are totally mind-blowing. Mind-blowing indeed, Zvix thought, their antennae drooping in resignation. The Confederation needed to know about this immediately. But first, they needed to understand just how deep this rabbit hole of human gaming expertise went. The Regional Stellar Commander Championship transformed the Genesis Mall's central courtyard into a gaming arena. Admiral Zvix stood at the observation platform, their diplomatic credentials granting them an elevated view of the proceedings. Hundreds of young humans had gathered, their gaming stations arranged in concentric circles beneath holographic displays that showed their gameplay to the cheering crowd. Admiral. Sarah waved from her station, her tournament badge identifying her as player 127. Did you see the new map they released for the championships? It's got quantum filament storms. Zvix's antennae twitched violently. Their species had lost 3 exploration fleets to quantum filaments before developing proper detection systems. Yet here, children were treating these cosmic death traps as exciting obstacles to navigate around. Contestants, prepare for round 1. The announcement echoed through the mall as the tournament director, an enthusiastic human in his 30s, took the stage. This year's championship features our new impossible space scenarios, inspired by real astronomical phenomena. The Admiral's tactical display was working overtime, processing the various gameplay streams. Their eyes widened as they observed multiple instances of strategies that the Confederation considered classified. In one corner, a 14-year-old was casually explaining wormhole manipulation to his younger sister. In another, 2 teens debated the most efficient ways to weaponize solar flares. "Check this out," Sarah called out during her first match, her fingers flying across the controls. "If you time your jumps with the filament pulses, you can actually ride the quantum wake." Zvix watched in horror as Sarah's fleet surfed along the edges of the quantum storm, using the deadly phenomenon as a propulsion system. Their tactical computer began displaying error messages. The maneuver she had just performed was theoretically impossible according to known physics. "That's my daughter." Mrs. Chen beamed from beside the Admiral, offering them some popcorn. "She's been practicing that move all week in our basement. Had to ground her twice to make her do her homework instead." The Admiral's translator struggled to process this. Humans were grounding their young for spending too much time mastering advanced space combat techniques. The implications were staggering. Between matches, Zvix overheard 2 teenagers discussing strategy. Their casual conversation made the Admiral's exoskeleton pale to an almost transparent state. "If you modulate your shield frequency to match the enemy's weapon signature," one explained, "you can actually absorb their fire to power your own weapons." "Yeah, but that only works if you've got good timing," his friend replied. "I prefer creating micro-singularities as distractions. The AI never expects you to weaponize gravity itself." Zvix had to steady themselves against a railing. The Confederation's most advanced research division had only theorized about these concepts, yet these humans were implementing them as basic gameplay mechanics. Sarah's voice cut through the Admiral's existential crisis. "Admiral Zvix, I made it to the quarterfinals. Want to see something really cool?" The Admiral watched as Sarah's next match began. She immediately split her fleet into smaller units, each one moving independently, but somehow maintaining perfect synchronization. The tactical display started flashing warnings. The level of coordination required for such maneuvers should have been impossible without a neural network. "How?" Zvix began, then corrected themselves. "How many players can perform at this level?" "Oh, this is pretty standard for tournament play," Sarah's mother replied cheerfully. "You should see the international championships. Those kids can get really creative." Creative. Zvix's antennae drooped. Their species had spent generations developing rigid, precise protocols for space combat. Meanwhile, humans were encouraging their children to experiment, innovate, and treat it all as entertainment. As Sarah's match concluded with another impossible victory, Zvix made a decision. Their next report to the Confederation would need careful wording. How does one explain that humanity's children were casually mastering concepts that the galaxy's finest minds had barely begun to grasp? The tournament director's voice boomed again. "Quarterfinals begin in 10 minutes. Players, prepare your custom scenario modifications." Zvix's translator glitched completely at that point. Custom modifications. There was more. Between tournament rounds, Admiral Z-Vix retreated to a quiet corner of the Genesis Mall's food court, their diplomatic tablet connected to Earth's public information network. The semi-final matches wouldn't begin for another hour, giving them time to investigate the origins of Stellar Commander 3000. Computer, they subvocalized, access development history of the game. The results made their antennae curl in disbelief. The lead designer, Jack Martinez, had never served in Earth's military. He wasn't even a military consultant. He was just a retired cargo pilot. Z-Vix's third heart skipped a beat as they pulled up Martinez's interview from a gaming magazine. Yeah, I basically made the game because hauling ore through the asteroid belts got boring. You start seeing patterns in space after a while, you know. The way gravity wells interact, how radiation fields create safe corridors, that sort of thing. I figured it would make a fun game mechanic. The Admiral's exoskeleton began displaying stress patterns that would have alarmed any passing Vatrix. A cargo pilot had casually observed and codified principles that the Confederation's best scientists were still struggling to understand. Their research was interrupted by an enthusiastic tap on their shoulder. "Admiral, look who I found." Sarah beamed, standing next to an older human male wearing a worn jacket with his Stellar Commander Dev Team logo. "This is Mr. Martinez. He's here to watch the tournament." Sarah practically bounced with excitement. "He signed my controller." Z-Vix's translator took several seconds to recalibrate as they processed this development. The human responsible for turning advanced space combat principles into entertainment was standing before them, casually sipping something called a mint chocolate shake. "Sarah here's one of our best players," Martinez grinned. "She really gets the underlying principles. Most kids just try to brute force their way through scenarios, but she understands how space flows." "The underlying principles?" Z-Vix managed to ask. "Oh yeah." Martinez pulled out his tablet, showing a series of rough sketches. "See, when I was running cargo through the Saturn rings, I noticed how ships could use particle density waves for subtle course corrections, save a ton on fuel that way. So I built that into the game's basic movement system. Kids love it because it feels natural, like swimming, but in 3 dimensions." Z-Vix's tactical computer, still running in the background, began highlighting terms in Martinez's casual explanation that matched classified Confederation research projects. The Admiral watched in growing disbelief as the human pulled up the game's original design documents. "These were my first drafts," Martinez continued, scrolling through diagrams that looked disturbingly similar to advanced military tactical displays. "I wanted to make space travel feel realistic but fun. You know, actually use real physics instead of that Hollywood stuff. Kids are smart. They can handle the real deal." Sarah nodded enthusiastically. "The quantum mechanics tutorials really helped me in science class. Ms. Thompson said my paper on theoretical faster-than-light travel was really creative." Z-Vix's antennae went completely rigid. "Tutorials? Oh yeah," Martinez chuckled. "We included an educational mode that explains the science behind each game mechanic. Can't just tell kids to use gravitational lensing without explaining how it works, right? That would be irresponsible." The Admiral's tablet slipped from their suddenly numb fingers. The Confederation had assumed humanity's rapid advancement in space travel was a fluke, or perhaps the result of stolen technology. The truth was far more terrifying. They had turned their most advanced scientific principles into teaching tools for children. "Admiral." Sarah looked concerned. "Your color's doing that sparkly thing again. Want to watch me practice before the semifinals? I figured out how to create stable time dilation fields using synchronized gravity wells." "Time, dilation, fields." Z-Vix's translator stuttered. "Yeah." Martinez beamed proudly. "That was part of our latest update. Got the idea from some theoretical physics papers I was reading. Amazing what they're discovering these days, right?" Z-Vix could only nod numbly. They needed to completely rewrite their report to the Confederation. Humanity hadn't just mastered advanced space combat principles, they had made them accessible to children. and they had done it all by accident. Admiral Zvix sat in their temporary Earth quarters, surrounded by holographic displays showing recordings from the past few days. Sarah's semifinal match would begin in 2 hours, but right now, the Admiral needed time to process everything they'd learned. Their initial mission report lay discarded on the desk, its assumptions now laughably outdated. Zvix had originally written about humanity's primitive but promising space combat training methods. How quickly things had changed. Computer, replay sequence 47B. They commanded, watching as a 10-year-old human child casually executed a maneuver that had cost the Confederation 3 cruisers to perfect. The recording showed the boy's mother congratulating him with an ice cream cone afterward. A message notification pulsed on their diplomatic tablet, Supreme Commander Vexthor requesting an update. Zvix's antennae drooped. How could they explain that humanity's greatest military achievements were being casually distributed through their entertainment networks? Their tactical computer was still analyzing footage from the tournament's earlier rounds. Every few minutes, it would flag another impossible maneuver, another classified technique being used as a basic game mechanic. Zvix had stopped reading the alerts after the count passed 1,000. Computer, access Earth Gaming Network statistics. The results made their exoskeleton ripple with stress patterns. Stellar Commander 3000 wasn't even humanity's most popular space simulation. It ranked 5th, behind games with names like Galaxy Quest Online and Star Pioneers. Zvix quickly pulled up footage from these other games, their third heart nearly stopping as they realized the implications. A gentle knock at their door interrupted their spiral of revelations. "Admiral," Sarah's voice called out. "Mom wanted to know if you'd like to join us for lunch before the semifinals. We're getting pizza." Zvix opened the door to find Sarah wearing a tournament jersey covered in sponsor logos. Behind her, Mrs. Chen smiled warmly, holding what appeared to be an insulated food container. "I brought you some of that seaweed snack you liked from yesterday," Mrs. Chen offered. "I noticed you seemed comfortable with the texture." The Admiral's antennae twitched with emotion. Here was humanity in a nutshell, capable of casual brilliance in space combat simulation, yet equally concerned with making sure their alien visitor had appropriate snacks. "I've been practicing something special for the semifinals," Sarah announced as they walked toward the food court. "Want to see my tablet? I've been running simulations during lunch break at school." Zvix looked at the casual sketches on Sarah's tablet, their tactical computer immediately identifying 3 different violations of known physics. The child had apparently discovered a way to use quantum entanglement for faster-than-light communication, all while eating something called a peanut butter sandwich. "Sarah," Zvix ventured carefully, "do you understand the principles behind what you're doing in the game?" "Sort of," she replied cheerfully. "The tutorial mode explains most of it. Plus, we had a whole unit on quantum mechanics in science club last semester. Did you know that space-time is actually more like a fabric? You can fold it if you're careful." Mrs. Chen beamed proudly. Sarah's always been good with spatial reasoning. Her teacher says she has a natural intuition for physics. Natural intuition. Zvix's antennae curled in resignation. The Confederation had spent centuries developing rigid protocols and procedures for space combat, trying to impose order on the chaos of the cosmos. Meanwhile, humanity was encouraging their young to experiment, to play, to discover new possibilities through trial and error. And they were succeeding. "Oh," Sarah exclaimed, checking her phone. "They just announced the semi-final scenario. It's going to simulate a collision between 2 neutron stars. How cool is that?" Zvix's translator briefly shorted out. "The most destructive astronomical event known to science, and humans were turning it into entertainment for their children." The Admiral's report would need yet another revision. Perhaps, they thought as they watched Sarah excitedly explain neutron star physics to a younger competitor, it was time for the Confederation to reconsider their definition of advanced civilization. The championship arena hummed with excitement as thousands of viewers, both in person and online, gathered for the final match. Admiral Zivik stood at their observation post, their tactical display struggling to process the sheer complexity of the upcoming scenario. The collision of two neutron stars wasn't just a background effect, it was the centerpiece of the entire challenge. Sarah sat at her station, adjusting her controller settings while chatting with her opponent, Mainway, a 14-year-old prodigy from Singapore. Zivik's translator picked up their casual conversation about quantum mechanics and nearly crashed. "I was thinking," Ming said, testing his controls, "if we synchronize our shield harmonics during the initial explosion, we could create a stable pocket of space-time to work with." Sarah's eyes lit up. "Oh, like in that paper about quantum tunneling. That's brilliant. Want to try it together before we start competing?" Zivik's antennae twisted into a knot. These children were casually discussing cooperative scientific exploration in the middle of a championship match. Their species had fought wars over less advanced theoretical concepts. "Finalists, prepare yourselves." The tournament director's voice boomed through the arena. "This year's championship scenario, Dance of the Dead Stars. 2 neutron stars will collide in exactly 10 minutes. Your mission: survive, thrive, and maintain your fleet's integrity while harvesting exotic matter from the collision zone." The Admiral's tactical computer began displaying warning messages in rapid succession. The scenario wasn't just testing the player's combat skills, it was simulating one of the most complex astronomical events in the known universe. The match began. Zivik watched in stunned silence as both Sarah and Ming immediately split their fleets into precise formations. Their ships moved through the deteriorating space-time like schools of fish, navigating a complex current, each movement calculated yet somehow natural. "Look at that coordination," Martins whispered, now standing beside the Admiral. "They're actually using the gravitational waves as propulsion. I didn't even program that as a possibility. They figured it out themselves." Zivik's exoskeleton began displaying rainbow stress patterns as they observed the children implementing theoretical physics concepts that the Confederation's best scientists had only dreamed about. Their ships were literally surfing on the fabric of space-time, using the immense gravitational forces not as obstacles, but as tools. The neutron stars drew closer to collision. The simulation's physics engine rendered the event with frightening accuracy. Magnetic fields twisted, radiation levels spiked, and space itself began to warp. Yet Sarah and Ming's fleets danced through the chaos with impossible precision. "Now," Sarah called out excitedly. Her fleet synchronized with Ming's, their combined shield harmonics creating a stable bubble of space-time, just as the stars collided. The crowd gasped as the screen filled with light. Zivik's tactical display froze completely, unable to process what it was seeing. The children hadn't just survived the collision. They were actively harvesting energy from it, using techniques that violated at least 7 known laws of physics. "That's my daughter," Mrs. Chen cheered, offering snacks to the stunned spectators around her. "She's been studying stellar physics all semester for this." The Admiral watched as Sarah and Ming's fleets separated, now engaging in the competitive portion of the match. But even their combat maneuvers showed a deeper understanding of space-time mechanics than most advanced civilizations possessed. They weren't just fighting. They were experimenting, innovating, and discovering new possibilities in real time. "Hey, Mom," Sarah called out during a brief lull in the action. "Did you see how we used the magnetic reconnection effect? Just like in that documentary about solar flares." Zivik's translator finally gave up and rebooted. The children were treating fundamental forces of the universe like playground equipment, and their parents were treating it like a school science fair. As the match reached its climax, with both fleets executing maneuvers that would have made veteran space admirals weep, Zivik made a final note in their report. "Most urgent recommendation. Never, under any circumstances, should we allow humanity to realize what they actually know." But watching Sarah's joyful face as she pulled off another impossible feat of spatial manipulation, The Admiral suspected it was already too late for that. Admiral Zvix sat in their quarters aboard the Confederation diplomatic vessel, staring at the final version of their report. After 6 drafts and countless revisions, they had finally found the right words to explain humanity's unique situation to the High Command. The small trophy sitting on their desk caught the starlight, its inscription reading Honorary Player, Stellar Commander Championship 2025. Sarah had insisted they accepted after the tournament, claiming the Admiral's presence had brought good luck. The tournament's conclusion had been spectacular, with Sarah and Ming ultimately agreeing to a cooperative victory after their innovative tactics had effectively broken the game's physics engine. The developers had already announced plans to incorporate their discoveries into the next update. Zvix's antennae twitched as they reviewed their final recommendations one last time. 2. Confederation High Command. Subject: Urgent reassessment of human civilization. After extensive observation of human training methods, I must strongly recommend immediate reclassification of Earth from emerging spacefaring species to advanced civilization with unique development pattern. Primary findings: humans have developed advanced space combat principles through recreational simulation. Their young are extensively trained through games that accurately model complex astronomical phenomena. Their approach to learning prioritizes experimentation and innovation over rigid doctrine. They have turned our most classified military concepts into public entertainment. Most critical observation: they do not realize what they have achieved. Recommended action: fast-track humanity's integration into the Confederation, but under no circumstances should we inform them of the true significance of their games. Their ignorance of their own advancement is currently our greatest strategic advantage. A message notification pulsed on their screen, a video call from Sarah. Zvix accepted it, their translator warming up. Admiral, did you see the new patch notes? Sarah's excited face filled the screen. They're adding quantum entanglement mechanics to the basic tutorial. Now everyone can learn about instantaneous information transfer across space-time. Zvix's exoskeleton rippled with barely contained stress. The Confederation had classified quantum entanglement research as too dangerous for most member species, and humans were teaching it to children. Also, Sarah continued, Mom wanted to know if you'd like to join us for dinner before you leave Earth. She's making your favorite seaweed rolls. The Admiral found their voice modulator struggling with unexpected emotion. I would be honored, Sarah. And thank you. For what? For showing me that sometimes the best way to advance is to play. Sarah grinned. That's what Mr. Martinez always says. Oh, hey, before I forget, I've been working on this cool new technique. Want to see? Zvix watched as Sarah shared her screen, demonstrating a maneuver that shouldn't have been possible according to known physics. Their tactical computer began displaying warnings again, but this time, the Admiral simply turned it off. Instead, they opened the small program they had been working on, their own attempt at creating a simple space simulation game. Perhaps the Confederation could learn something from humanity's approach after all. Sarah, they asked carefully, would you be willing to test my game sometime? I believe I could benefit from your expertise. Awesome. A new space game. Sarah's enthusiasm was contagious. Want me to share it with my gaming group? We love trying new things. Zvix's antennae curled with amusement as they added one final note to their report. Additional recommendation: consider implementing human-style gaming in Confederation training programs. After all, if we cannot prevent humanity from advancing through play, we might as well learn to play alongside them. Personal addendum: I have enrolled in Earth's Steam gaming network for further research. Any unusual activity on my accounts should be considered vital diplomatic work. Signing off, Admiral Zvix. P.S. Currently ranked Silver II in Stellar Commander 3000. Advancement to Gold expected within the month.